and welcome to Sprinter's webinar on our ultimate guide to becoming compliant with multiple frameworks through the Crosswalk method. I'm Aarti, and I'll be moderating today's awesome session that will be headed by Alexandra Blanc and Devika Anil. Alexandra, who I am sure you've seen on LinkedIn and on events such as these, has been acknowledged as one of the 30 security experts to follow on LinkedIn in 2023 by Media Sonar and is a testament to his expertise and influence in the cybersecurity realm. Furthermore, he has been recognized by LinkedIn as one of the top voice and also 20 outstanding contributors to global knowledge for like cybersecurity by the Risk Sharing Institute, which is fantastic. And then, of course, we have our favorite woman in cyber, Devika, who is an integral part of Sprinto's compliance expertise and has helped over 500 plus companies with their controls and continuous monitoring. Not only is she an ISO lead auditor, she's also adept at implementing controls for SOC 2, PCI, and more. She is the best person to have a conversation with Alexandra about the topic of the hour, which is all about multi-framework compliances. How do you go about it? How do you not duplicate tasks and increase your errors? And how do you continuously monitor and collect evidences for all of them? This session is, of course, recorded. You'll be getting the links to this. We will also be sharing this PPT. You should be able to download it as well. So this is fully for your knowledge. So I'm going to now hand over the reins to Devika and Alexandra, and I'm going to have them take it forward.
Thank you, Aarti.
Yes. Devika,
thank you so much, Aarti. Yes. Wonderful. Let me do that. Thank you so much again for wonderful, very, very warm introduction, I would say. And also, I am deeply honored to be on screen with Alexandra here, who comes with obviously so many years of experience in this compliance field. I'm really honored to be sharing the screen with you. Just to get started, right? What do we want to do in this conversation today is to first set the scene rather for where does this need for multi-framework compliance come in, or why is it more relevant in today's times than it was maybe a couple of years ago? And when a company starts going for multi-framework compliance and the journey to achieve different kinds of certifications, what are some tactical difficulties that companies come across, and what is a general solution or a best practice solution in achieving multi-framework compliance much more seamlessly or efficiently? We're going to give a little bit of a demo into a real life example. We might take a few examples from SOC, from ISO, from PCI as well, and generally help you understand how collecting evidence one time, that is you're testing all of your controls and your requirements one time as an organization, but being able to report to multiple audits using the same evidence, how is that going to sort of make your lives much more easier when you're handling multiple audits and multiple frameworks for your organization? Does that sound good?
That sounds amazing. And thank you, Aarti. Thank you, Devika, for having me with you as well. And, I'm so impressed with your skill and knowledge as well. You said, first, thank you for being there, but I'm thankful to share the screen with you. And so let's go ahead. It's going to be exciting because I think people don't really get how valuable the work they do in one side of compliance can actually help them grow another one and then access more markets. So let's dive into it.
Absolutely. So the first piece is, why are we really talking about compliance for multiple frameworks, right? Where does this need really come from? So Aarti, if you could move into the next slide as well. Perfect. So I think it's more relevant in today's times because businesses today have to generally navigate way too many kinds of regulations and standards in and around the world. A lot more information security or even privacy related regulations have come out around the world. So there's your GDPR in the EU. You might be adhering to more privacy oriented frameworks that are very specific to Australia, the APAC region, the US, different state laws and local laws of the US and so on, which are primarily touching upon the same activity. Are you protecting personal data? In a similar manner, you might also be processing cardholder information along with personal data, and you might want to get into your organization security posture a little bit into PCI DSS and so on. You might be looking at healthcare data. Then you again have a whole wide range of regulations that you need to be compliant with if you are storing some kind of or generally processing any kind of personal health information. Then there are obviously a lot more standards around the world which are more generic in nature as well. So your SOC, your ISO, are all frameworks that generally show or showcase your security posture to the outside world. But again, you might be doing more business in the US, where SOC 2 is much more understood, and people are able to get into the depths of, or your customers will start recognizing, while ISO is more prominent in the EU, APAC sort of a region as well. So you generally have to navigate yourself a lot around information security and compliances and audits these days, which is why this becomes more relevant in today's times. Sorry, yeah, I just saw a poll that came up in. But generally, what are the challenges now that the companies have to? Now, it's not even actually what has changed in the recent times is more that earlier it used to be as you scale up, as you go mid-market and enterprise, list of customers is when you had to go for different kinds of frameworks and audits, but which is not the case any longer. Given that there are a lot of laws and regulations, you still have to, even as a startup or anybody who's handling information of various customers at hand, have to now start complying with a lot more regulations. It's a lot more stricter these days, given the kind of breaches and incidents that we're seeing around as well. So now, given you're looking at multiple frameworks, what are some challenges that you come across? What a lot more people don't realize is that there is a lot of redundancy, or there's overlapping controls across different frameworks. There is, I'll talk a little bit about this in upcoming slides as well, on how this overlap gets created. But generally, if you look at frameworks, they're talking about information security. And that means that you have to protect data across the flow of the data throughout your organization, right? So it has various touch points in your organization. This data falls into the hands of people within your organization. So you need to obviously protect certain, or put some measures in order to ensure to train your people, ensure they are aware of what their responsibilities and roles are in terms of safeguarding this data. Then that might be another touch point where it flows through your network, your technical aspects, your servers, your databases, and so on. You need to be able to put some measures around that as well. And thirdly, there might be organizational related controls that you might want to put in place. As a management, you want to be able to review how your security posture sort of changes over the times. And so all of these controls that I'm speaking about right now is what is a part of all of these security frameworks. If you look at SOC 2, ISO, PCI, HIPAA, and so on, they generally try to put a lot of overlapping controls. They're all talking about information security at the end of the day. And what people don't realize is there's a lot of redundancy in the kind of activities you'll have to do for each of these audits. The second thing is, obviously, there is inconsistency. Every framework has its own terminologies and nuances. How do you understand whether these mean the same? At what point do you make the call that I'll have to maintain these as two separate activities versus the same activity? Is again a challenge most people face as they go through different frameworks and audits. And obviously, it's a very time-taking activity. So the third point, complexity, actually has to be associated with complexity in terms of time and effort that you go through. When you're going through various audits at different points in time during the year, as a team, you might not be able to keep up with the whole back and forth with the auditor. You have to be able to share the evidences. Then there is an explanation of why this evidence meets that framework's requirements and so on. It's a lot of time and effort. So the more you're able to reuse the same activities across different audits, obviously increases the efficiency. I would love to hear a little bit of thoughts from Alexandra as well on this topic. How do you see compliance landscape change over the recent years?
Yeah, well, it's evolving quickly, because there is a big shift toward more privacy, which is a good thing. It did start in Europe first with GDPR, and then, we got CCPA in California that came in. But the thing is that organization that came with a formal security framework in place, as you were stating, with the proper control, have a great advance into the enterprise readiness toward the compliance and regulation. Basically, and what we saw from the field, organization that didn't do anything formal, didn't follow any framework, it's like, we're good, we got that stuff running. When they got hit by the need to comply with the regulation, it was a nightmare because they had to breathe from scratch. While, thankfully, for the formal framework that has been used, they had already all the baseline controls. An organization that did implement at least one security framework were already way more confident with a much, much smaller gap to breach to reach to the compliance and regulation requirement. Also, one thing that's interesting is that the compliance evolved both in many countries, and if you work with an international company or if you get customers around different countries, you sometimes have to comply with the regulation of each target market. And therefore,
Right.
having something ready in place with most likely, 60%, 70% of already existing control is opening the market for your organization.
Yeah.
So that's a great thing to see. And overall, I'm a big advocate for security and privacy by default and by design. And security people say compliance is not security. Well, but at least it's bringing a good baseline. You got something great in place. And finally, I hope I don't speak too much, but you spoke about the audit phase of the implementation of compliance. And there is two steps usually. You got the implementation, where there is the lead implementer helping your organization to set up the formal process. And then you get the audit phase, which is actually a verification that verify the proof of the implementation. And that's the proof collection you were speaking about that has to be kept and maintained. I think that's something that is very unified across the framework. You need to keep track and formal documentation. And that's a great thing because you can reuse that across the different framework and compliance requirements you're going to face. So that's about it. We can move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the point that you made that when you're already SOC 2 compliant, you're likely already 60-70% compliant with maybe another framework as well, which gives you a huge value add when you obviously make that sort of a claim even to your prospects and your customers. I love that point as well. Arti, we can move on to the next slide. So in the upcoming slide, what I'm going to sort of touch base on is to explain a little bit on that redundancy portion. I'm sure a lot of folks who are a part of the InfoSec community understand what kind of overlap or redundancy I've been talking about. However, just to touch that point a little bit more in detail, even for the folks who are not aware of how different frameworks and regulations work around the world, I'm just going to explain what an information security program typically looks like in every framework, or what are the important things that every framework generally talks about, right? So if we can move into the next slide, Arti. Yes. So generally, how any information security compliance looks at putting in place a security program is they look at a specific kind of data. So in SOC 2 or an ISO, this can generally be your scoped data, which is your customers' data in general. While if you look at GDPR, it's a slightly bit more of a smaller set. So you're looking at personal data of European citizens or UK citizens specifically. It can be, again, around the world, different regulations would focus on specific countries' data. Then you would have PCI, which is, again, looking out only for cardholder data, HIPAA maybe only for healthcare data, and so on. So they basically look at the data that you want to protect. You're essentially putting a box around that data and saying, I'm going to be protecting this particular set. And now where does this data flow? So this data, as I mentioned earlier as well, would have multiple touch points within your organization. So some common touch points usually include people in your organization. Then there are some physical assets like your laptops, your servers, documents, papers that you have in your office, and so on. So your data resides there. You can also have technical assets where your data could reside. So it can be in your code, in case of a software development company. It can be in your cloud hosted assets, so on AWS, on Azure, and so on. Then you would have finally anything else that you might want to do in your organization as well. So other parts of it, like your management and your vendors, all of those are clubbed into your organization as a touch point, right? So generally, you have these three touch points for the data, and you're trying to protect each of these touch points with some measures. So in case of people, it can be around, hey, I will run certain background verification for my employees. I'll ensure that they acknowledge their policies, their roles and responsibilities that keep them in check, whether they are safeguarding the data that they're supposed to access and process. They will undergo certain amount of training and so on in order to help them understand and ensure to take more informed decisions as they handle data. When I talk about physical infrastructure, I might want to put certain checks and measures in place for my laptops. I want to ensure that there is a screen lock present. I want to ensure an antivirus runs on these machines so that even if a data breach occurs, or I encrypt the hard disk, right? So even though a breach occurs, it does not land into the wrong hands so easily, is generally the measures that I'm putting in place. In technical assets, this can be logical sort of access control. So who has access to my code repo? Who has access to my database? Some form of vulnerability scanning. I ensure that all changes that you're making in your code, you're making in your documents, you're making in your server network infrastructure related changes, all of these generally undergo some kind of a change management process. So a rogue employee does not make change as they wish, right? There's somebody always who's checking the work of every employee or every work that goes into all of these changes. There is an incident management sort of module. And then as an organization, there is some organizational level of things that measures that I would put in place as well. Conducting risk assessments, conducting vendor risk assessments, having these policies and procedures that I spoke about earlier in the people section in place, having drafted all of the measures that I'm going to be putting in place, ensuring management conducts reviews of all of these security posture and related activities from time to time, right? So these are generally measures that help you protect your information across the touch points in your company. And this is what is being spoken about in any of these frameworks. So you can talk about ISO, you can talk about SOC, PCI. The scope might change. So you're generally talking about a cardholder data or personal data or customer information. Scope changes, but you're generally trying to protect across all of these measures. So if I put background verification or access control as a measure, it generally helps me meet across frameworks, the requirements of across frameworks as well. So it's not just about putting these measures, as I mentioned on the heading, it's all about, as an org, you're testing these activities only once. You're ensuring that these activities happen once, but you're able to reuse that evidence across different audits. And that is the position where you're creating that sort of a common control. So as an org, you're doing certain set of activities, which then helps you meet different audits at different points in time of the year, again, making your journey much more efficient.
Yeah, Devika, if I can drop a second.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you raised like great point there. I mean, after all, cybersecurity is people, process, and technology, which you represent from the compliance standpoint there. And that's all the best practice that you can see in cybersecurity frameworks and organization. And you raised another interesting point about GDPR, which is targeting PII, personal identifiable information of people. And you spoke about cloud. And I just wanted to highlight that the compliance side of things, when you subscribe to a cloud provider, depending of the model you take, they sometimes the cloud provider is certified and compliant with security framework, but it doesn't mean that as a customer you inherit that. Sure, the platform will have to, but in case of GDPR, if you collect PII or any other compliance requirement, this is something that you still have to do. So the work you do on the security controls that you implement, that you document, and that you maintain, this is still something you do in the cloud. Don't think this is something you don't do. This is part of it. This is still a work to do, because that's something we see all over the place. People, I go in cloud and I don't have to care. Yeah, you still have to care. Even if you're SaaS model, that you still handle the data. So you're still the data, the person collecting the data, the organization, and you need to handle that. So if it's payment information, you're going to still have to handle the PCI side of things, unless you unload part of it, but you still have some responsibilities to have in place. So that's just what I wanted to bring into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to, while you said that, I just wanted to touch on another point on the slide as well. So although I explained it in terms of a top-down approach of how generally these requirements have come into play in these frameworks, in practical scenarios, what tends to happen is initially a company goes in for a SOC or an ISO, and they realize they have to put in initial amount of effort in order to put all of these measures. Then as they grow into different markets and different business segments, start handling more regulated kind of data, they tend to go into more frameworks. And as they go through an PCI and then a GDPR and then a HIPAA, they start realizing the need to come up with not security frameworks, rather they need to put in a security program in place, which helps you meet different kinds of frameworks. So in a practical scenario, that's how companies end up looking through it, which is what could potentially change. Initially itself, if you try to put in a security control or a program in place, it becomes again very easy for you to scale much faster later without worrying about your compliance journey. You can still focus on your product and whatever else you're building in your business in general. Yeah, I think we can move into the next slide. Yes. So when you're charting your course around this common controls, right? You've picked from SOC, you've picked from ISO, you've picked from PCI. You generally, information security specialists come up with the common control framework, or generally list down the org's practices at which you're testing again once, and you're able to report to multiple frameworks or multiple audits as you go through the journey. Some of the common pitfalls that I have seen happen around me, and even while we were building common control framework, that I would like to bring to everyone's notice as well, is the first is there is a misalignment of scope among different framework requirements. I think I briefly touched on this earlier as well. So when you're talking about GDPR, your scope of putting your access control or the scope of your data for which you're putting all of these measures is generally your PII. In a PCI, it changed to a cardholder data. So although you might have put that practice of an access control previously in place, it becomes very important for you to relook at whether those controls are now active in your given the new scope that you're going through. So it's something that people end up not realizing and thinking that, oh, I have already put in this access control measure, or I have set up I'm just taking a common example here. I've set up encryption for all the PII related data. I'm in the clear, but it is not. While you go through an ISO audit, you're generally going to do it for all of the data, important data that you will have to protect. And in a cardholder environment like PCI, you're looking at the card data, your PAN number, and so on and so forth, that you will have to protect. So even though you put a common control in place, it is important for you to reassess the scope of that implementation of that control while you go through different frameworks. Very important for somebody who's already implemented a common control framework and trying to implement a new framework. Another thing that I've generally noticed as well is also updating these mappings become very important as you put a common control framework. So I have generally seen that, let's say ISO had a 2013 version that they had come out with, post which they have come out with their new version as well. SOC 2 had its revised points of focus. PCI had a 3.2 versus now there is a 4.0 version. So it's very important for you to keep up with those mappings. It is a very every year these mappings likely change. For example, HITRUST has a yearly revision, and other frameworks come up with a revision in a couple of years. It's important for you to keep control of what mappings you've done before and how it has changed over the course of times when the regulation of the framework itself has changed. That's the second aspect you'll have to keep in mind. Obviously, the third one is there is usually misunderstandings between the auditors, the organization itself. So you would have implemented your SOC 2 controls, and now you have mapped certain common controls to PCI. It is very important to ensure that auditors or assessors are sort of involved early on in your cycle, so that you're really ensuring that they are on board with your mapping as well, that you have done for a PCI DSS or for a NIST or generally any other framework that you're going through. So that at the time of the audit, you're not really running around and trying to find out whether, or trying to convince them of the mapping, or there is any additional work that needs to be done. All of this you're identifying early on in your journey, your compliance journey. So it's important to have assessors for that framework on board as well when you're looking at new frameworks. The fourth thing sort of combines all of the three things above. All of these SOC 2, even if you go online today, if you search for SOC 2 to a PCI mapping or SOC 2 to an ISO mapping, all of these are publicly available, but you should not have a total dependence on the publicly available mappings. Again, the main points being the three of them that I've mentioned above. It is important for you to read those controls, see how they're mapped, whether the scope is still making sense, whether it aligns with the risk of your company becomes very important for you. So you should not totally depend on the public mappings. It might be a great starting point, but you should obviously reanalyze those, reassess those, given the scope of the framework that you're looking at and given the risk that your company is facing against those data that you're trying to process. I think I've covered generally a lot of the steps to take care of while I spoke about the pitfalls itself. Important to, again, align with your management, align with your assessors early on that you want to implement a common control framework. And once you choose, ensure that you review those controls with the scope in mind as well. Alexander, I would love to hear your thoughts here as well.
Yeah, you bring so many points, so I'm going to put just two of them. One thing that is key when you implement is the interpretation of the recommendation or the annex, if it's about ISO. And how do you do things, and is it something acceptable? And that's sometime, depending of the scope, the context, and all, it will work. And when you speak with an expert, an assessor, or someone that will help you in your journey, rather than just reading online, you might save a lot of time and effort when you implement things, and it might save some money as well if you have to add controls, because sometimes you may be just following something, thinking it's aligned, but something else very much simple was actually an acceptable control. Or can fall under acceptable risk under certain condition and stuff like that, which actually help you getting faster, closer to the compliance side of things. That's one thing. And the second point that you brought, Devika, is you spoke about PCI 4, PCI DSS 3 and 4 change, which impact your compliance. This is why you have to maintain that on a continuous basis. But there is also the change in the organization when a project get attached or reassigned. Well, that's a big change in organization, and that will impact the compliance side of things. So the change management should include a check about the compliance, because it will impact what has been assessed before. So that kind of change as well has to be monitored. The longer you take to evaluate the impact, the bigger the gap you will have to breach, and therefore it's going to be more difficult when the auditor comes in and you didn't think about that. So it's part of the cultural, enterprise culture that you have to develop when you are compliant, where it has to be baked into the process of the organization, so you save a lot of time and effort when it comes the audit time. So that's about it.
Sounds perfect. I think you covered everything that I wanted to say on this slide. Just to generally even give an example, I think we spoke a lot of this very theoretically. I'll give a very brief example to talk about, what this really means. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Yeah. So just to give a very quick example, not going to take so much time here. But generally, this is the way even Sprinto as a platform, when we're building the common control framework that maps to over 20 plus frameworks as of today. And we've even pre-vetted this by not just one auditor, but almost every auditor that we have as a part of our network, right? So this is generally the process we take about to do the mapping across various frameworks. So we have a SOC 2. I've taken a quick example here. So SOC 2, SOC 2 C6 point common control criteria, C6 generally talks about putting in place some kind of an access control measure, specifically physical access control, like ensuring that there is locks in, all sorts of CCTV camera, and ensuring who has access to specific server rooms and so on, to even including logical access, which is who has access to your AWS account and databases and servers and so on and so forth. It also talks about identifying and authenticating the users as they access the data. It's either from the devices or into those accounts. And it also talks about anything that talks related to authorization, restriction of access when a person may be potentially off boards your company or leaves your organization. You need to ensure that those accesses are revoked and so on. Similarly, ISO also talks about access control, because again, it's primarily about information security. The Annex A Control 9 generally talks about having an access control measure in place. You have to have a policy which defines and talks about those controls that you have in place. And you obviously, it is in a very similar manner, ensure to control access to your networks and services, ensure every user who's provided access is in line with what job function they need to perform, and so on and so forth. So generally, it's all about access control. Now, when Sprinto talks about this, we're not going to generally talk about SOC 2 separately or ISO separately, but we're going to talk about organizations controls. So this is the common set of controls that you as an organization is going to put in place. So let's say control number 1 is I will implement MFA across all of my accounts, so that, I'm really ensuring who gets access to these data is really the person that's supposed to be getting access, right? So having MFA, some form of password complexity, is a kind of measure that I would put in place. Let's say I would also have an access control policy, which defines these measures, or maybe even procedure documents as well, which defines the activities that have to be conducted in order to stay in line with these controls. I might even specifically say that I have an access provisioning mechanism. So what do I mean by access provisioning mechanism? I might be talking specifically about Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, access provisioning mechanism. So everyone who I'm giving an access to an account, I'm ensuring that their role is relevant, which is typically your RBAC systems, or I have some kind of a ticket-based access control where I'm generally ensuring or reviewing every person's access as they come in and ensuring to offboard them as well. So I might have a control around access provisioning. I could have a control around access deprovisioning. So this is generally about any person who's changing a role or is leaving your organization generally has to revoke their access prior to completing all of their formalities and they're moving out, right? So some control around access deprovisioning as well. Now, these are all common activities that you're doing as an organization. This will help you meet the particular evidence in the requirement of C6 in SOC, while it is also about meeting A9 in ISO. So you're doing these activities once, but you're meeting the different framework regulations at the same time. So that was roughly an example I wanted to cover. That's everything I had. I would love to hear Alexandra's thoughts on this as well.
That was a great example about the mapping of control across the different frameworks and how you maintain them with your organization control baseline. So this is great and really meaningful. So we can switch to the next slide, I guess. I'm going to speak just a little bit about the requirements of ISO 27001 and the control implementation, just keep it practical, because very often it's like some kind of mystical stuff if you didn't go through it. And I want to show that this is fairly simple. And so let's speak about some key elements of ISO 27001, which is my core thing. And Devika spoke about it before, about the requirements you have when you put in place information security plan, etc. So some key element of ISO 27001 will be the scope of the ASMS. Devika spoke a lot about the scope. The scope defines what you cover when you implement the security framework. It's what's in it and what's out of it. So basically, you focus on what's in it to implement it. And that's a notion that exists in many, many frameworks. If you can come back, and some key element, and so you have like the information security policy, people, process, and technology, which reflect what Devika is speaking before about the risk assessment, risk treatment methodology and report, statement of applicability, definition of security role and responsibility, acceptable use of assets, etc. And these elements are what make your security plan overall, and these are the elements that are going to come as proof for the auditor when they assess if you did implement it right. These are the documents you're going to bring. This is not the full list of them, but this is the key asset I find when you start to implement and look toward the implementation of ISO 27001 implementation in your organization. Next, Arti, if you want. So the key asset when you work on the framework and you look towards certification is having the process documented and communicated. That's a key part of it, because what we faced on the market, you reach organization and you tell them, oh, they want to reach a certification because to access a certain market or contract, they have to be compliant. And then they see a control and say, yeah, you need to have backup and you have to have that kind of, MFA, etc. And say, yeah, we have it. But it's not formal. They do not have a policy. They do not have the documentation for it. So if it's not documented in the scope of the certification, it doesn't exist. Something that you have but is not documented, maintained, that's not something that is actually valid. And the cool thing is that they just have to write a formal documentation about it to reach somehow the compliance if it's covered in the whole scope. So documentation must be maintained. There has been an update, and Devika spoke about the PCI DSS update version 3 to version 4. Same thing with ISO 27001. It's just lately in 2022 got updated, and it came with 11 new controls. That's part of the change that you need to actually adjust to in order to maintain the certification for the latest version of ISO. And just to give you an idea, I did list the 11 new control that you have in 2022, which is configuration management, information deletion, data masking, data leakage prevention, monitoring activities, threat intelligence, information security of use of cloud services. And as you can see, this is all new controls are actually extremely focused on cloud services, because the existing one were not including the whole scope of the cloud capabilities and consideration. So this is bringing a lot of them to be applied and extended to the scope of your cloud workloads. So you have ICT, which is a readiness, information and communication and technology readiness for business continuity. So that's about resilience. How do you have a formal plan for your business to survive? And that's a key asset in the market, because if you deal with partner, you want to become a provider and you become a key provider in a certain industry, then they want to know that you are not going to crash like the next month and not be able to provide services if they choose you as a business partner. This is where the implementation of such framework is going to help you prove that you do things right. And finally, physical security monitoring, secure coding, and web filtering are the last control that has been added in 2022. Artie, we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to take just two different controls that are part of the ISO 27001-2022, just to speak practicality. So basically, A57 is about threat intelligence, and the way it works in ISO, you get the definition of the control in the main documentation, and in the annex, it tells you what or how you should do that. But it's not very, very strict. It's fairly open, and you have to match requirements, which are given a bit like that. So the description is saying the control requires you to gather information about threat and analyze them somehow. It's market monitoring for threats. So people in certain organizations will have to buy threat intelligence. Sometimes, if they have a very mature model and they have a SIEM control, like automated detection and response, they might integrate the threat intelligence into the SIEM to get more better performance on detection and stuff. But if you are a small organization and still target the ISO certification, you can still achieve that with a formal documentation, which means you have someone in charge to watch the threat landscape evolution through, let's say, watching the news or watching me post on LinkedIn, whatever. But stay aware and document that process and keep track of the evolution. And that's also a valid implementation of this control in the scope of a certain organization. So when I was saying like you have to take someone to help you going to the certification, it's because in a way it can be a very deep integration of an automated system. In another context, it can be just being aware of the threat that is matching the vertical of your business organization, and then you maintain your security posture according to the threat toward your posture. Artie, if you want to switch to the next one. Next one was secure coding. This is one of the new requirements of 2022, A828. So basically, this control requires you to establish secure coding principles and apply them to your software development. This is something that I value a lot because, as I said, I am a supporter of privacy and security by default and by design. And you do not achieve security and privacy by default and by design if you do not start in the software development phase. So that control for any thing that is under the scope of your certification, and most likely your deliverable or your operation software and tools, then this one will make your team have a mandatory look at the secure coding principle, which means releasing products that are tested, that avoid vulnerabilities as much as they can do during the development process. It doesn't mean that there will be no vulnerability later on, but because it's a continuous process, that's something you keep ongoing, if something pop up, you will be able to fix it and release an update. And that control will ensure that you check that thing and you don't leave your customer exposed with vulnerable software. So that's giving you an idea. I'm not going to read it all because the presentation is going to be available if you want. And this is, as Devika was saying, this is publicly available if you want to explore. And again, lead implementer and the auditor can help you actually put it in a practical approach to make sure that you match the requirement. But the overall idea is do things right, have your things secure, and then you can be confident that you release things the right way and your partner customer can actually trust your process for the one that has been certified or certified compliant under the scope of, in this case, ISO 27001. Next, Artie. So business impact of compliance. Next one. That's, we speak about the value proposition of the certification. We did touch a little bit about that. The key aspect I see from compliance, and compliance is not security, they all say that, but there is only one way to prove that you do things right, is through compliance. So if you start to comply with something, you do not stick to that. It's just leading a great baseline of best practices, which ideally you expand to a global security culture for the organization. And when you do not do that as a point in time, because you need it at that date and you rush to do it and that's over, we don't touch it. This is not the way we go. I think what Sprinto bring is also the continuous integration with that, the continuous monitoring, and that's how you maintain it. So basically, grow your business value and trust. you implement a security framework or many security frameworks because you need some more to address or access some markets, because sometimes it's a requirement to be able to bid on some contract, especially government side or regulated area and regulated field. So complying with regulation, like we were speaking about GDPR, you have to comply with that. Otherwise, you're going to have fees if you collect customer data. And eventually obtaining a certification. The certification is kind of the proof of the achievement that you can use to show the trust or to be eligible to the market. But the goal is not the certification. The goal is the achievement of having the security implemented. Finally, so I was speaking about it, you can access the regulated market and reduce your liability. One of the big things that you have in GDPR and the law 25 in Quebec, which is a copy of GDPR, so it's spreading, is the idea that you have some responsibility or not. And if you are facing an incident, and nothing is bulletproof in the market, it's not because you are compliant that you're not going to face an incident, but the fact that you have implemented a framework and you have it in a formal way shows that you did all you could to protect the data, and there is no negligence in that. And the negligence key, I mean, it's a bit out of the compliance side of things, but if you get someone suing your organization because the data has been stolen or you leaked it, and you cannot prove you did anything right, then you will be liable and you will have to pay for that. You can be charged for that. While if you had best practice in place, it's kind of dropping the responsibility because you did it right. So an incident can happen. Okay, it's bad. You did follow the incident response, but it's minimizing the impact. So somehow I also see the compliance side of things a little bit as an insurance, and the business value is you reduce the potential loss in case of incident or anything that can happen around. Obviously, the scope is key there, as we were saying. The scope defining what you cover when you implement your security framework, the one you pick. And ideally, the more you cover, the best it is, but the more complex it is. And what we see from the field, Devika, I think you see that sometimes organizations will start with the key process of the organization. They focus on the delivery side because this is where they need it. And over time, they will expand the scope and implement the needed control around and expand the certification and the compliance around the whole organization when it's doable. So, yeah, we can go in. Yeah. Devika, if you want to add something.
No, I think absolutely right. I think it's not just about showing a promise to your customer. It's also about the fines and the associated nuances that come with a breach is what you want to be insured against.
Yeah, exactly. And so speaking about that, we speak about overlapping control between some security framework that are available out there. So this is giving you an idea of the effort you put in one, how much it's giving you ROI if you go to the next one. So organization compliant with SOC 2 are 90% compliant with ISO 27001. Because the control that Devika showed you earlier are very, very similar, even if they are presented in a different manner, this means that you already have them in place. Organization compliant with PCI DSS are 80% compliant with SOC 2, which is an amazing thing when you think about it. And it also means that all the security framework are very aligned, and that's common sense because this is about data protection. So they kind of work toward the same goal, although they focus on different areas. Like PCI is about the payment card industry, ISO is more just overall information security protection, SOC 2 is more for use in a financial institution, and IPA more in the healthcare industry. Yet the key thing is the data protection, the sensitive data protection. So compliant with ISO 27001, you are 65 compliant with PCI DSS. With the security control, then you have to verify that the scope is also applied to the same to the whole process that have to be included. But basically, if you have this control, you have them already. And finally, organization compliant with IPA, the healthcare data protection, and 80% compliant with SOC 2, which is a great thing as well. So that's giving you an idea. The small gap between the two requirements of frameworks, and it's fairly simplified, but it's showing you that when you did the effort once, it's not crazy to consider that you may reach another one and make the effort to do that. But to do this, you need to take the approach of the organization security control baseline, and you have to go away from the single security framework controls, because otherwise you're not going to make it. You need the common ground, the common central organization control, which will be mapped against the other and maintained over time. We can go next, Arti. And now we're going to speak a little bit about tools. I mean, Devika, unless you had something to add, I just jumped to the next part. But how do you implement these frameworks? Obviously, you have platforms like Sprinto and other tools. The key aspect of it, the core thing, is data protection at first. So I speak about CIS, Center for Internet Security, because this website is it's working according to the NIST requirements, cybersecurity framework, and more, and it's bringing you the best practice of security control. So basically, if you apply the best practices like system configuration hardening, cloud configuration hardening, all the best practices, you do right to protect your data. And then this is opening the door to getting access to formal security control you need in the security frameworks. So how do you do that? You get the help from certified professional in the framework you start with. I mean, if you want to go ISO, you're going to go with an ISO implementer, certified person. It's going to help you toward that journey. The first key is assessing why do you want it, where do you want it, and when do you want it. And basically, you usually have an evaluation of your actual security maturity of the organization. And this is where the person is going to roughly be able to tell you, the time frame makes sense, or no, the time frame, I'm sorry, there is such a big gap, you need to work a lot on that. And that will give you an idea. You cannot, I mean, we've done all, I think, a rush compliance implementation, but this is meaning that you hijack a lot of resource of your organization toward the compliance of the security framework you target, and you kind of lose these resources for the operational capabilities. So if you rush on that thing, be aware that you have to hijack the resources from many places and slow down the production of the organization. So it's better to go ahead and plan, so it's going to be way more smooth. And you cannot really put the tons of resource on that as well, because you need people that know the organization, that know the operational reality of it. Because you can bring any consultant you want, if they don't know what you have in place, they will not be able to provide the needed data to actually fill the requirement. So finally, make sure you get the top-down support in your organization. I met many IT people or cloud project manager that wanted to bring the compliance to the organization, but if there is no support from the management, then it's not going to happen, because there is a lot of impact on the organization-wide. And you need sponsor, you need project manager, you need the support, and you will face resistance to change toward the existing team, existing process. They don't want to change because, it's going to be dramatic. In the end, it's never dramatic, but change, we're human, we don't like change. So that's one of the challenges, and the top-down support is going to help you bringing your action as legitimate. You do not, just do the compliance and implement a framework just out of, it's going to be funny, whatever. This is a serious work that you have to put in place. So you need project management platform. You need to start with the best practice. I spoke about the CIS, and you need to integrate the security within your change management process. I think, and that's to me, and Devika, you tell me what you think about that, but a key aspect overall as security and privacy by default by design is to integrate the security checkmark into every step of a change management process, or at least at the end of every change. Like, you have a single check that says, does that change impact in any way the security posture of the organization, from a governance standpoint, from a practical security standpoint? Because when you do that, and if there is a yes, then you call your compliance guy, your security resource, and then you do the impact analysis. Sometimes it's just nothing, but if you don't do that over time, you are building a huge gap that's going to be very expensive to bridge. And when the next year or whatever your cycle of audit hour is the next time is coming in, it's going to be, but you changed that and that and that. Huge work to do. While if you maintain that over time, then it's going to be very easy. You just have to inform about the change, and now you made this change compliant with your requirements, your security control, and then it's going to be very smooth ride, and just say, okay, that's valid. Your advisor is going to say, okay, and then the auditor is going to come and validate all of this. So that's about it. Devika, anything you want to add on that?
Oh, roughly, I think on very similar lines, it's important to keep security first as an attitude as you go through different compliance frameworks. That really helps you, again, reuse, go through all of these audits much efficiently with a lot of less effort as you go through this journey. And that's what I think generally even Alexandra is trying to tell you, is to keep that open mind about having security first. Ensure your practices within your organization is taken care of first. Audits and evidences will generally follow.
Correct. So next one, Arti. I don't remember what's the next slide. Oh, takeaway and QA. Great.
we come to the end, but there is one question. Can you please explain more about integrating security within your change management process?
So,
Devika, do you want to?
oh, go ahead,
Yeah.
Devika, if you want.
Any of you
Well,
guys?
I can take it if you want. I mean.
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay. So what I mean by that, I kind of explained it when we spoke with Devika right now. It's when you follow a formal change management, where you get a mature organization, because small and medium businesses often they do not have formal process. Even in the change management, they decide on the fly. This is like corridor discussions. There is nothing formal, so that's not something I speak about. I speak about organizations that have a certain maturity already. They target the implementation of framework, and then they want to maintain the compliance. They want to maintain the efficiency of their controls, and to achieve that, when you have your change management process that is in the organization, you want to change, I don't know, workflow, marketing, communication, anything, a sales process, you have to have that checkbox and basically involve, this is a cross discussion across team, the security people or the security or the compliance or the person that manage the compliance side of things in your organization, just to make sure that the change you are about to make are not going to jeopardize the compliance and security efforts that your team, the security team, is putting in place. And that's it may look complicated, but it's not just about, hey guys, we are going to change that. Does it have any impact with the security side of things? Most of the time, no, that's fine. Just keep it documented. We're good. No problem. So that's what I mean by implementing the security check in the change management. Basically, each time you change something in a formal way, just ask the security impact. And if you implement privacy protocol or like for GDPR, about the privacy side of things, obviously.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, what you apply your change management process to will depend on your business and the kind of scope you're looking at. It can be as I mentioned, in a SaaS company, in a cloud company, it can be about your network and your infrastructure and the code and all of those changes that you're making. And also generally the security process changes. So you're making a change in your policy, your procedure, your control, and how you monitor it and so on. So it'll depend really on your business. Obviously, interpreting it from a security aspect, your policies, your risk management, and your governance measures is anyway going to be key to all kinds of organizations. Further from that, where you apply your change management process will be to identify first what is your critical assets and your data that you want to protect, and then you apply the same spirit or the same principle across all of those assets to say, any change that you make, how do you ensure that any random person cannot make those changes, and if these changes are made, how would it impact your downstream security measures is the key principle you'll have to keep in mind. Hope that helps.
Correct.
All right, Rahim, I hope that helped. And but if you do want to chat more about this, we are tagged Devika's LinkedIn, Alexandra's LinkedIn. You can even reach out to them there and continue this conversation. But thanks everyone so much for tuning in on this session. I hope you found it informative and educational, and I hope it helps you navigate the problem that you're facing and helps you overcome it. Thank you so much for your time. And with that, we come to an end. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.